And then we pull back from this initial statement of the reign of Jesus the Messiah, the Lord. And we say, look at the whole of Acts 2 to 12. And what do we see? We see Jesus being announced as King, as Messiah, as Lord. And at the end of that sequence, finally, Herod, who has been in the background all along, comes out and says, actually, there is already a king of the Jews, and there can't be two such people, therefore I'm going to stamp you out. And in chapter 12, as you know, there is the clash, we mentioned it last night, where Herod kills James, the brother of John, and then he wants to kill Peter. You sort of start with the number 2 or 3 person and see how that's going to play, because if people don't like it, well, it may not be hugely serious, but actually people do like it. So, right, let's go for the big guy now. So we go for Peter, and this time, for whatever reason, the church is praying, and the angel comes and gets Peter out of prison. We'll come back to that towards the end. So I want you to hold this entire first half of the book, chapters 1 to 12. Within that framework, Jesus is announced as King of the Jews. And the news of Jesus as King and Lord inevitably generates a clash with the present authorities. And though Herod himself only comes on stage at the end of that sequence, and say he's been in the background, it's rather like in Luke's Gospel. We don't meet that King Herod that often, but in fact, he's in the background, and when he finally emerges in the trial scene where Jesus is sent to Herod, and then Herod and Pilate become friends, we realize that this issue of kingdom, of kingship, has been on the agenda all through. But interwoven with this theme of lordship and kingship is the second theme, again, that I mentioned last night, and we saw it in relation to the coming together of heaven and earth, which is the theme of the temple. Now, Messiah and temple, as I hope you know, belong closely together. David wants to build the temple. God says, well, you can't do it, but your son will. 2 Samuel 7, another key Christological text as the early church reads the Old Testament. When God says to David, I will raise up your seed after you who will sit on your throne. He will be my son, I will be his father, and he will build me a house. God's answer, this is hugely important for understanding the incarnation. God's answer to David's request that he, David, should build a place on the earth where the living God will truly dwell, God's answer to that is, well, sort of, but actually, I am going to give you a child, and I will be his father, and he will be my son. In other words, really, the place where God wants to dwell on earth is not a house made with bricks and mortar. It is a human being from the family of David. And this human being from the family of David will himself be the temple builder. And so the immediate fulfillment is, of course, Solomon, and Solomon is the king, great David's greater son, who then does build the temple, and who then is the one who consecrates it and becomes the great wise king, and the ends of the earth come to hear his wisdom. That's a whole other theme, wisdom, another great Christological theme. But this pattern of king as himself the bearer of the promise, but then also as the temple builder, continues right the way on through. You see, in the great stories in Kings and Chronicles, the greatest kings are the ones who cleanse or rebuild the temple. Hezekiah and Josiah, they're the ones who stand out. And after the exile, the reason Zerubbabel doesn't get off the ground is he doesn't actually manage to rebuild the temple in such a way that God will come back and live in it. And there's this constant tension in the so-called Second Temple period. Is this really the new temple? Have we really refounded the temple? Because after all, at no point in the Second Temple period does it say that Yahweh has come back to live in the temple. The glory departed from the temple, as you know, in the book of Ezekiel, when Ezekiel has this vision of the Shekinah glory, the whirling wheels, doing a vertical takeoff from the temple and going off into the wilderness. At no point does it say that he's come back. Malachi written well into the Second Temple period, says that he will come back. But then, as we shall see later on, Isaiah 66 says, why would you want to build a temple for God? Actually, heaven and the highest heavens can't contain him. So maybe it was a category mistake all along. So there's a tension there. And we find already now in Acts chapter 2, and then going on, that if Jesus and now even the church are the place where heaven and earth overlap, we are going to run into problems, to put it mildly, in relation to the existing temple in Jerusalem. And hence within these two themes, the lordship of Jesus, Jesus as King and Lord over against all the other authorities, and the worship, the temple, within all this, we have acted out again in Acts what you have in the gospel story. The welcome, the challenge, the warning of the kingdom. The welcome of the kingdom and the generation of a new community that are the kingdom people. The challenge of the kingdom. Are you up for this? Do you realize what will happen, how it's going now? And the warning, what happens if you don't take it seriously. And so from the end of chapter 2 right through to the end of chapter 11, allow 1 and 2 at one end and then 12 at the other to be sort of bookends for this whole section of Acts, and divide the rest of it from chapter 2 verse 37, that's after the Peter speech, the result of Peter's speech, beginning at chapter 2 verse 37, right through to the end of chapter 11. I'm going to divide that into 3 more, with the centerpiece being the speech of Stephen, well, the whole Stephen incident. So the centerpiece, think of it as a sort of an arch. You've got chapters 1 and 2 over here. You've got chapter 12 over here. If I had been better prepared, I would have had visual aids and PowerPoint presentations, and I could have done this prettily. My son, who is a university lecturer, says, "Dad, you should do it. It's so easy. I'll teach you how." And I say, "Listen, I just don't have time to do all that technology. I'm sorry about that. But I hope you can see it in your mind's eye. 1 and 2 over here, 12 over here. And then in the middle, the coping stone of the arch, the place where this temple claim comes home to roost in the Stephen speech, chapter 6 verse 8 through to chapter 8 verse 3, if you're taking notes. And then the 2 things immediately either side of that, the first section, chapter 2 verse 37 through to chapter 6 verse 7, that's 2:37 to 6:7, and then the other side of the Stephen speech, chapter 8 verse 4 to chapter 11 verse 30. And just so that you see how this works, let's just characterize it like this. And each time I do this, it comes out slightly different. So these headings are not set in stone. They're just an attempt to probe and see what's going on in Luke's mind. From 2 verse 37 to 6 verse 7, the church as the alternative temple. 2:37 to 6:7, the church as the alternative temple. And then 6:8 to 8:3, Stephen and the judgment on the old temple. And then chapter 8 verse 4 through to, you see, the point is, in all those great eschatological promises in ancient Judaism, there is this sense that when God does for Israel what God is going to do for Israel, then the whole of the rest of the world will get in on the act as well. Psalm 72 again. When the Messiah, the Son of David, is enthroned, his dominion will be from one sea to the other, from the river to the ends of the earth. The idea of the rest of the world coming to worship the God of Israel and to be submissive to the King of Israel, this is a deeply, deeply ingrained Old Testament theme. And so what you've got is the church as the new temple, worshipping the one who is Israel's true king. Then the great clash, the Stephen speech, where it becomes clear, yes, we really do mean this, and we're ending with the vision of Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And then the result, the word goes out, and the Samaritans and then the Gentiles get to hear it. And so you have the stories of Philip and then Paul and then Peter, as we'll see in the third of those bits.